Silent dignity speaks louder than anger. There are moments in life when silence becomes the most powerful statement one can make. In a world where people often equate strength with volume and authority with aggression, it takes immense courage to respond to injustice with calmness and restraint. When that CEO was told he couldn't sit in the VIP seat he had paid for, many expected outrage, confrontation, or even a public scene. After all, he had every right to be angry. He had worked his way up, earned his position, and followed every rule. But instead of shouting or arguing, he chose something far more impactful: silence grounded in dignity. His calmness didn't mean weakness. It meant mastery over himself. While everyone else in that moment was watching, whispering, waiting for the drama to unfold, he chose composure. He didn't raise his voice or demand attention, yet he commanded it effortlessly. His quiet presence filled the cabin in a way that no outburst ever could. That's the paradox of dignity: it doesn't need to announce itself, it simply exists, and everyone around feels it. This kind of silence isn't about passivity. It's about control. It's the kind of silence that says, "I know who I am, and I don't need to prove it to you." For many people, especially those who've had to constantly fight for recognition, this form of restraint is revolutionary. It tells the world that your worth isn't determined by how loudly you respond to disrespect but by how deeply you understand your own value. When someone has confidence rooted in identity, no external act of discrimination can truly shake them. In that moment on the plane, every passenger witnessed something rare: the transformation of humiliation into quiet power. The airline staff, perhaps unaware of who they were speaking to, likely expected resistance or confrontation. What they got instead was grace under pressure. And grace, when shown in the face of injustice, disarms ignorance like nothing else. It holds up a mirror to those who act unfairly, making them confront their behavior without a single word being spoken. The passengers began to notice the irony. A man denied his rightful seat simply because of the color of his skin remained calm, polite, and respectful. Meanwhile, those representing the airline began to lose their composure. Their words became uncertain, their tone defensive, their authority fragile. The shift in energy was visible, not because of shouting, but because of silence. The CEO's calm presence exposed their insecurity. Anger often clouds judgment. It can make even the most righteous person lose their balance. But dignity keeps you steady. It reminds you that your reaction defines you more than the injustice itself. When you stay composed, you hold the narrative. You decide what others will remember, not the insult, but your poise. People may forget the words spoken in a heated moment, but they never forget how someone carried themselves when they had every reason to break. Silent dignity is also a form of teaching. Without uttering a single lesson, the CEO taught everyone watching what true power looks like. Power is not in shouting down your oppressor, but in refusing to stoop to their level. It's in choosing peace when the world expects rage. It's in allowing your character to be the loudest voice in the room. That day, he showed that a calm response can echo longer than an argument ever could. For many of the onlookers, it wasn't just an uncomfortable scene, it was a revelation. They saw how unfairly a man could be treated based on assumptions, and how that same man could rise above it with quiet confidence. The moment forced them to reflect, not on his actions, but on their own reactions. It made them question how they would have responded if it were them in his place. That is the true strength of silent dignity. It doesn't just protect your peace, it provokes thought. It challenges the moral comfort of bystanders. It makes those who act unjustly aware of their behavior without confrontation. The CEO didn't need to say a single word to make his point: his presence, his calm gaze, and his refusal to respond in kind said everything. Even those who initially doubted him began to feel respect. It's human nature to be drawn to composure, to admire someone who refuses to let circumstances define their worth. In a society where noise often drowns out meaning, his quiet defiance became a symbol of strength. It reminded everyone that sometimes the loudest message comes from the one who chooses not to speak. His silence became a story, not because he said nothing, but because his silence spoke volumes. It told of restraint born from experience, of pride grounded in principle, and of a heart that refuses to let hate dictate its rhythm. True leadership shows under pressure. It's easy to look confident when everything goes according to plan, when the world applauds your efforts and success feels guaranteed. But real leadership is tested in moments of discomfort, humiliation, and uncertainty. When the situation turns unfair, when eyes turn to you expecting a reaction, that's when your character truly reveals itself. The CEO on that plane didn't know he was about to be tested that day. He walked in expecting routine professionalism, but instead he encountered disrespect disguised as procedure. In that moment, his reaction would define not only how others saw him, but how leadership itself would be understood by everyone watching. When the airline staff denied him the VIP seat, the atmosphere shifted. People watched closely, waiting for the explosion. The tension in the air was almost tangible. Yet he didn't raise his voice, didn't let frustration take over. Instead, he carried himself with the same calm confidence he would show in a boardroom. His body language remained composed, his voice steady. That was leadership in its purest form, the ability to stay centered when the world around you loses balance. Anyone can lead when things are easy, it's when you're pushed to the edge that true leaders emerge. Pressure exposes what practice cannot. It shows whether you lead with ego or with purpose. Under pressure, pretenders crack while true leaders shine. The CEO's restraint wasn't about suppressing emotion, it was about prioritizing the bigger picture over the small insult. He understood that every action in that moment would speak louder than words ever could. A leader doesn't just react, he sets the tone. His calmness became the silent command that dictated the energy of the entire space. Suddenly, those watching didn't just see a passenger being mistreated, they saw an example of how integrity behaves under attack. True leadership means knowing that your response carries weight beyond yourself. Every decision, every word, every breath taken in tense situations can inspire others or discourage them. That day, the CEO demonstrated that power isn't measured by how loudly you demand respect, but by how effortlessly you embody it. He didn't have to announce his position, didn't need to remind anyone of his title. His composure did that for him. That's what separates a leader from a follower, the ability to lead through example, even in silence. The pressure could have broken anyone else. The humiliation, the injustice, the public nature of the situation, all of it was designed to provoke. But leaders think differently. They understand that every challenge is an opportunity to reveal strength. He stood there, not as a victim of prejudice, but as a model of restraint and dignity. Even as others questioned his rights, he upheld his values. That's the essence of leadership, being guided by principles, not emotions. In moments like these, leadership transcends position or profession. It becomes about humanity. The CEO didn't just represent himself, he represented every person who has ever faced quiet discrimination and chose to respond with grace. His calm reaction wasn't just personal discipline, it was a lesson to everyone present. Leadership isn't just about leading teams or companies, it's about leading hearts, even when your own heart is being tested. True leaders don't need authority to command respect. Their behavior earns it naturally. Every passenger who watched him that day learned something about composure, about the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout. Even those who may have judged him at first began to see the contrast, the difference between positional power and moral power. The airline staff held authority, but he held leadership. That difference is everything. Authority enforces control, leadership inspires it. Under pressure, people tend to mirror the energy around them. When one person loses control, it ripples. But when one person remains calm, it steadies everyone else. That's what happened in that cabin. The CEO's calmness softened the room. Conversations quieted, tension eased, and even those who had acted unjustly began to question themselves. True leadership isn't reactive, it's contagious. It shifts the atmosphere, turning chaos into reflection. There's also courage in calmness. It takes bravery to stay poised when your instincts push you toward defense. It takes awareness to think beyond the moment, to remember that your reaction might outlive the incident itself. Leaders understand this. They know that how they handle adversity becomes part of their legacy. That's why the CEO didn't just protect his image that day, he protected his integrity. Pressure didn't make him something new, it revealed who he already was. People often mistake leadership for dominance, but it's really about influence. And influence built on self-control lasts far longer than influence built on fear or force. When the CEO chose composure, he demonstrated that leadership isn't just what you do when others are watching, it's who you are when no one expects you to lead. His quiet strength spoke to something deeper than authority. It showed that leadership isn't about winning an argument, it's about winning respect, even from those who wronged you. That moment became a mirror for everyone there, especially those who aspire to lead. They saw that power can exist in calmness, that leadership doesn't require aggression, and that grace under pressure can transform perception. The CEO didn't plan to teach a lesson that day, but he did. By staying true to himself, he reminded the world that leadership isn't proven in comfort, it's revealed in crisis. Prejudice often hides behind policies. It doesn't always come wearing an obvious face of hatred or open discrimination. Sometimes it's dressed in politeness, covered by corporate language, or disguised as standard procedure. That's what makes it so dangerous. It allows people and institutions to act unfairly while pretending to follow the rules. When the airline denied the CEO his rightful VIP seat, they didn't use harsh words or openly racist comments. They hid behind a policy, a vague rule about seating, upgrades, or verification that suddenly seemed to apply only to him. That's how prejudice survives in modern systems, not through open hostility, but through selective enforcement. The staff might have said, "I'm sorry, sir, it's just our policy," or, "There seems to be an issue with your booking." On the surface, these sound reasonable, even professional. But underneath lies the quiet injustice of assumption. The assumption that he didn't belong in that seat. The assumption that he wasn't the kind of person who usually sat there. Prejudice doesn't always scream, sometimes it whispers through decisions that appear neutral but are guided by bias. It's in the small hesitations, the extra verifications, the doubtful glances. And it's those small moments that build up to something larger and far more damaging. For someone like that CEO, who has built his reputation and worked his way to the top, this kind of subtle prejudice isn't new. He's seen it before, in boardrooms, in negotiations, in hotel lobbies, and now on a plane. Each time, it comes with a different excuse, but the pattern is the same. People question his presence in spaces where they think he doesn't belong. They cover their discomfort with professional language, but the message is clear: you're out of place. That's how prejudice continues to operate in a world that claims to be equal. It hides behind words like policy, procedure, or protocol, and yet it treats people unequally. The tragedy of such prejudice is that it convinces those enforcing it that they are doing nothing wrong. The airline staff probably believed they were just doing their job, following company rules, maintaining order. That's how systemic discrimination perpetuates itself, through ordinary people doing what they're told without questioning the fairness of the system they serve. It's not always about intent, it's about impact. And the impact of these hidden biases is felt deeply by those who are on the receiving end. When the CEO was told to step aside, the moment wasn't just about a seat, it was about identity. He knew the difference between a genuine mistake and an act of disguised prejudice. The tone, the hesitation, the careful phrasing, he recognized it instantly. Yet, he chose not to expose it with anger. Instead, he exposed it with patience. Because nothing reveals prejudice more clearly than when it's met with calm truth. His composed reaction allowed everyone watching to see what was really happening. They saw that the issue wasn't policy at all, it was perception. The other passengers started to sense the imbalance too. They could see how differently he was being treated compared to others. Some looked away out of discomfort, others whispered quietly, unsure whether to speak up. That's the silent tension prejudice creates, it forces everyone into complicity through awkward silence. Most people don't want to believe they're witnessing discrimination, so they convince themselves it's just a misunderstanding. But deep down, they know what they're seeing. They know when fairness is being twisted to favor one group over another. Prejudice in modern systems survives through plausible deniability. It gives people the ability to say, "We didn't mean it that way," or "We were just following procedure." But when a rule only seems to apply to certain people, it stops being neutral. It becomes a shield for bias. The airline could claim they were just upholding standards, but the inconsistency in their enforcement told a different story. The CEO didn't need to argue to prove that. His silence made it evident. His dignity forced people to question the fairness of the situation on their own. That's the uncomfortable truth about discrimination today: it rarely admits to being discrimination. It hides in everyday actions, in systems built by people who never designed them for everyone. It exists in assumptions, in expectations, in subtle exclusions that are easy to overlook if you've never been on the receiving end. And because it's so subtle, it's easy to excuse. But for the person experiencing it, it's unmistakable. It's not about what's said, it's about what's implied. It's the feeling of being doubted, delayed, or denied for reasons that have nothing to do with merit. The CEO's experience on that flight was just one example among many that happen daily in quiet corners of society. From job interviews to customer service lines, from promotions to public spaces, prejudice finds ways to hide in the details. And the more sophisticated the system, the more invisible the bias becomes. But when someone like that CEO responds with grace instead of outrage, it forces people to see the injustice for what it is. His composure peeled away the layers of policy and exposed the real issue beneath them, an old prejudice wearing a modern uniform. Every onlooker saw how something as ordinary as a seating rule could become a weapon of exclusion. They saw how a simple policy could carry the weight of centuries of bias if applied unequally. That realization doesn't come through confrontation, it comes through exposure. By standing calm, the CEO made the invisible visible. He didn't have to accuse anyone, the truth revealed itself through their actions. Respect can't be bought, it's earned. No amount of money, power, or influence can force genuine respect from others. True respect comes from the way a person carries themselves, treats others, and stands firm in their values, especially when faced with unfairness. The CEO that day had every external marker of success: the tailored suit, the first-class ticket, the reputation of a powerful businessman. But when the airline denied him his seat, all of that status meant nothing to those who refused to see past their own bias. That's where the difference between demanded respect and earned respect becomes clear. Titles may impress people temporarily, but character leaves a permanent mark. When the CEO remained calm, his composure spoke louder than any argument ever could. He didn't need to flash his credentials or boast about his position. He didn't need to remind anyone of his wealth or achievements. His behavior reflected inner strength, and that quiet power drew more respect than any external display ever could. It's easy to act gracefully when you're treated fairly, but it's only when you're disrespected that true grace is revealed. The way he chose to respond, without arrogance, without anger, showed everyone watching that respect is something you build through integrity, not something you demand through authority. Money can open doors, but it cannot open hearts. You can buy influence, but you cannot buy sincerity. That's what made the CEO's response so powerful. Despite being wronged, he didn't lower himself to the level of those who disrespected him. Instead, he remained rooted in his values, showing that respect begins with self-respect. People often confuse fear with respect, thinking that commanding obedience or authority is the same as being respected. But respect born out of fear fades the moment power is gone. Respect built on dignity endures long after the moment has passed. The people in that cabin saw something they didn't expect. They saw a man who could have easily used his influence to demand justice immediately, yet he didn't. He didn't throw his title around or insist on special treatment. He didn't need to prove who he was because he knew who he was. That kind of confidence unsettles prejudice. It shows that a person's value isn't determined by others' recognition of it. When you know your worth, others are forced to acknowledge it, even if they don't want to. That's what the CEO's calm presence did. It quietly shifted the dynamic from humiliation to revelation. Respect, at its core, is reciprocal. It can't exist where there is ego or entitlement. The airline staff may have had authority at that moment, but they didn't have respect. Authority gives you control over others' actions, respect gives you influence over their hearts. The CEO understood that difference. That's why, even in a moment of unfairness, he kept his tone courteous and his posture composed. Because real respect isn't about how others treat you, it's about how you treat them, even when they don't deserve it. When he responded with calm politeness, it had an unexpected effect. The tension in the air began to shift. People who initially looked at him with skepticism started to feel something else, admiration. They saw strength disguised as gentleness. They saw that his silence wasn't weakness, it was discipline. That's the kind of strength people respect instinctively, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. His reaction created a contrast between himself and those who disrespected him. Without saying a word, he exposed their lack of professionalism while elevating his own character. What many people don't realize is that respect is not earned through status, it's earned through consistency. It's built in how you handle pressure, how you treat people beneath you, and how you conduct yourself when no one is watching. The CEO had likely faced situations like this before, and each time, he chose dignity. That choice built his reputation. Respect follows those who stay grounded, no matter how high they climb. That's why people respected him, not for his title, but for his temperament. As the minutes passed, the other passengers began to see the imbalance for what it was. They realized that the man being denied his seat was not just another traveler, he was someone whose quiet patience commanded respect without asking for it. Some passengers even began to question the airline staff, and that shift wasn't caused by confrontation, it was caused by example. People are naturally drawn to fairness and authenticity. When they see someone handle injustice with calm strength, they can't help but respect it. Respect earned through dignity doesn't just change how others see you, it changes how they see themselves. The airline employees began to feel uneasy, not because they were scolded, but because they recognized their own error. Respect has that effect, it humbles those who act without it. The CEO didn't need to lecture anyone or demand an apology. His character did the teaching for him. In the end, what lingered in that cabin wasn't the memory of conflict but the memory of composure. People forget titles, but they remember how someone made them feel. The CEO's quiet strength reminded everyone that true respect isn't granted by position or privilege, it's earned through how you handle adversity with grace. It's not about being right, it's about being honorable when you're wronged. One reaction can shift public perception. Sometimes it takes just a single moment, a single decision, to alter how people view not only an individual but an entire situation. When the black CEO chose calmness over confrontation, that one choice reshaped the atmosphere in the cabin. Before he spoke, before anyone understood who he was, the passengers saw a man being treated unfairly. Their assumptions were influenced by what they saw on the surface, his appearance, his quiet demeanor, his unwillingness to argue. But when he remained composed, when he responded with grace instead of anger, something changed in the collective mindset of everyone watching. That one reaction carried more weight than 1,000 explanations could have. At first, there was judgment in the air. People often rush to conclusions without understanding the full story. Some passengers might have assumed he was in the wrong, that perhaps he didn't belong in that seat. Others probably felt pity but stayed silent, unsure of the truth. That's how perception works, it's fragile, shaped by bias and incomplete information. But when he refused to respond emotionally, when he stayed calm in the face of humiliation, that perception began to shift. The silence that followed wasn't just his, it became the silence of realization spreading through the room. A single moment of grace can expose the truth hidden behind prejudice. The CEO didn't need to justify himself because his demeanor did it for him. His poise revealed the imbalance in the situation more effectively than any argument could. People began to see the contrast, the difference between his calm professionalism and the defensiveness of those denying him his seat. The staff's discomfort grew, not because of anything he said, but because his behavior made their actions appear unjust in comparison. The entire tone of the interaction transformed because one man refused to play the role others had assigned him. Public perception is powerful, but it's also fickle. It can turn quickly, for better or worse, based on how one moment unfolds. The CEO understood this, consciously or not. He knew that his reaction would either reinforce stereotypes or challenge them. Anger would have justified the prejudice in the eyes of some, restraint dismantled it. That's the power of emotional intelligence, the awareness that how you respond affects not just you, but how others see what's right and wrong. In that brief exchange, he shifted from being seen as a passenger in conflict to being recognized as a symbol of grace under pressure. People remember emotions more than details. They might not recall the exact words exchanged between the CEO and the airline staff, but they would remember how it made them feel, uncomfortable, reflective, inspired. That's the impact of a reaction handled with wisdom. It lingers in people's minds long after the event ends. The passengers on that flight would likely recount the story later, not as an incident of disorder, but as a moment when a man turned humiliation into quiet strength. That single reaction changed not just opinions, but perspectives. What makes such a reaction powerful is its unpredictability. People expect anger in the face of injustice. They anticipate confrontation when someone is wronged. But when the expected reaction doesn't come, it forces them to pause and think. That pause is where perception begins to evolve. The CEO's calmness disrupted the pattern people were used to seeing. Instead of confirming assumptions, he challenged them. His behavior invited reflection rather than resistance. In that silence, people began to question their own biases. The shift wasn't loud or dramatic. It happened quietly, in the glances exchanged among passengers, in the uncertain expressions of the crew, in the subtle shift of energy across the cabin. The man they had dismissed moments ago was now commanding their respect without saying a word. His reaction transformed him from a victim into a figure of moral authority. That's how perception works, it's guided by behavior more than status. The same people who once doubted his right to be there began to admire him for how he carried himself. That moment also revealed something deeper about human nature. People are drawn to dignity. They may not always understand it, but they feel it. When someone chooses calm over chaos, it stands out because it's rare. In a world that glorifies loudness, restraint becomes revolutionary. The CEO's reaction wasn't just about handling the situation, it was about rewriting the narrative that others had tried to impose on him. Every person on that flight learned something about how true power looks when it doesn't need to announce itself. His single act of composure turned a moment of potential disgrace into a lesson in leadership and humanity. It reminded everyone that influence doesn't always come from speeches or authority, sometimes it comes from silence that speaks truth. The public perception of that man changed instantly, not because of who he was on paper, but because of who he revealed himself to be under pressure. The airline's authority began to crumble in the face of his integrity. People started seeing the staff's actions for what they were, and his reaction for what it represented. That's the lasting power of one decision made in the heat of the moment. A calm reaction doesn't just protect your dignity, it reshapes how others see justice, respect, and decency. In that cabin, the CEO didn't just change the perception of himself, he shifted the perception of everyone watching, forcing them to see the difference between position and principle, between power and grace. Turning humiliation into inspiration is one of the hardest things a person can do. It requires emotional strength, self-awareness, and a deep sense of purpose. Most people, when faced with humiliation, react with anger or pain. It's a natural response to injustice. But there are rare individuals who can take that same painful experience and turn it into a lesson for others. The black CEO on that flight did exactly that. What was meant to embarrass him became a story that inspired everyone who witnessed it, and eventually, everyone who heard about it. His calmness transformed an act of disrespect into a moment of awakening. Humiliation is designed to break a person's spirit. It's meant to make them feel small, powerless, and invisible. But what happens when the person refuses to accept that role? When instead of shrinking, they rise with quiet strength? That's when humiliation loses its power. The airline staff may have tried to assert control, hiding behind excuses and authority, but their attempt only revealed their own weakness. The CEO's reaction didn't just protect his dignity, it exposed the truth that no one can humiliate you unless you let them define your worth. By staying composed, he flipped the entire dynamic. The act meant to demean him ended up elevating him. The passengers could feel it too. What started as an uncomfortable moment turned into something profound. They saw a man faced with blatant unfairness who didn't react with hostility but with grace. And that grace stirred something inside them. It made them rethink how they would have responded in his place. Inspiration often begins with discomfort, when we witness someone handling pain in a way we never thought possible. That's what happened in that cabin. A man's humiliation became a mirror for everyone else's conscience. His response wasn't just about him, it was about something bigger. Every act of quiet strength plants a seed in those who witness it. The CEO showed that dignity is not something that can be taken away by circumstance. It's a choice, a discipline, a reflection of who you are inside. His reaction became a story worth retelling because it gave people hope. It showed that even in situations designed to degrade you, you can rise by controlling what you give power to. That's how inspiration is born, when one person's restraint becomes another person's realization. What makes his story remarkable is not that he was a CEO, but that he responded as a human being with deep emotional intelligence. He understood that sometimes the best revenge is showing who you are without saying a word. He could have fought, argued, or demanded justice immediately. But instead, he chose patience. That patience turned a personal slight into a universal lesson. Every person watching saw the difference between external status and internal strength. The staff had authority, but he had grace. And grace, when displayed in the face of humiliation, has the power to transform bystanders into believers. Inspiration often comes from unexpected places. No one boards a flight expecting to witness a moment that challenges their perspective on respect and humanity. But when the CEO stood there, calm and poised, he changed the emotional temperature of the room. People began to see the situation differently, not just as an unfair act, but as a test of character. That shift in perception is what turns ordinary moments into stories worth remembering. The passengers didn't just see a man being disrespected, they saw a leader teaching a lesson without words. Turning humiliation into inspiration isn't about pretending the pain doesn't exist. It's about channeling that pain into something meaningful. The CEO didn't deny what was happening. He felt it, understood it, and still chose control over chaos. That choice spoke louder than any speech could. It reminded everyone that even when life places you in unfair situations, you can still choose how you'll be remembered. People might not remember the exact words spoken, but they will always remember the feeling of witnessing someone rise above cruelty. What made that moment powerful was its contrast. The staff's actions came from ignorance and bias, his reaction came from wisdom and strength. That contrast created a moral clarity that everyone in that cabin could feel. It stripped away the justifications, the excuses, and the systems that hide prejudice behind procedure. By responding with calm dignity, he forced people to confront what was really happening, not through accusation, but through example. His response turned an act of exclusion into a moment of education. Humiliation often isolates people, but inspiration connects them. As the flight continued, that sense of connection grew. The energy in the cabin shifted from awkward silence to quiet admiration. People began to realize they were witnessing something rare, a living example of resilience. The CEO didn't just protect his own pride, he gave others permission to see strength in stillness. That kind of moment lingers long after it ends. It becomes a story told to friends, shared in conversations, remembered whenever someone else faces unfair treatment. What began as an attempt to humiliate him ended up empowering others. That's the essence of transformation, turning something negative into something uplifting. The CEO's response showed that true inspiration doesn't come from speeches or power, but from presence. It comes from standing tall when others try to diminish you. His calmness was a lesson in itself, that the way you handle humiliation can either define you or inspire those around you. And in his case, it did both.